Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are. My name is Yliana Rodriguez. This presentation, the data I will present now is part of the data that I have obtained within my PhD project, which I am undertaking between Universidad República in Uruguay and Leiden University in the Netherlands. I'd like to start by thanking the American Name Society for accepting my proposal for this presentation that I have titled Rioplatense Spanish Gaucho Toponymy in the Falkland Islands, from Chacho Point to Third Arroyo. Well, I'd like to start by telling you that I am interested in language contact in general, but now I'm looking into Spanish-English contact in the Falklands. And by looking at maps, one realizes that there must have been quite an interesting contact between English and Spanish speakers in this archipelago. But before we start our trip, I'd like to tell a little bit about the islands. Well, you know, they are also known as Islas Malvinas, especially to Argentina. They are composed of two main islands, the West Falkland and the East Falkland, Gran Malvina and Isla Soledad, respectively to Argentina. Fewer than a dozen of the other islands are inhabited. The Falklands are located about 480 kilometers from Argentina and 12,000 kilometers from the UK. The capital is Stanley. It hosts about 3/4 of the total population. The rest of the people live in small settlements. So the population density is very, very low. The islands are administered as a British overseas territory. It is an enclave of great controversy since the British took control of the archipelago from Argentina back in 1833. And the Republic of Argentina has never relinquished its sovereignty claim. Some of you might remember that in 1982, the two countries went to war over the islands, resulting in the British retaining control. This political scenario is worth considering because names such as Islas Malvinas or Isla Soledad, and even the name the Argentines used to call the capital, which is Puerto Argentino, are frowned upon by islanders. I mean, this double toponymy. Keep that in mind because we'll go back to that. Regarding the local language, well, since the beginning of the English settlement, the islands have been continuously inhabited by an English-speaking community. So Falkland Islands English is one of the most recently developed world Englishes, rising from the contact of English varieties from England. However, due to the contact with Spanish speakers, this variety has borrowed a considerable number of Spanish loanwords, resulting from contact with Spanish-speaking gauchos. These words are mainly related, although not exclusively, to country life and livestock. Interestingly, the borrowing process extended to place names, resulting in a fair number of Spanish place names that originated in the 19th century, which are still used today. The literature on Falklands toponymy lacks an examination on Spanish place naming within the new framework of toponomastics, which is contemplating maps as well as inhabitants' narratives. Furthermore, within his research, Woodman, 2016, argues that while dual toponymies are not uncommon across the globe, what is exceptional in the Falkland Islands is that only the English toponymic inventory is used in situ, and that the Spanish language names are only used outside the islands in Argentina. However, this is true to a certain extent. It is true that locals don't refer to the archipelago as Islas Malvinas or don't talk about their capital as Puerto Argentino. But if we look carefully, we find out that there are Spanish place names that are not part of this dual toponymy, which are used in situ and appear in both British and Argentine maps. Hence, in this paper, I seek to address the subject of Spanish toponymy in the Falklands, from the islanders' perspective, studying local maps, looking into locals' attitudes towards them, and analyzing them in terms of their components. Given that place names are particularly interesting for contact linguistics, as they give us a diachronic picture, they indicate which cultures have actually been present in an area at a time, and they unveil which languages were spoken in a certain time and place, I thought about resorting to them to know more about the contact I'm so interested in. But how? Well, by identifying them after locally collecting and studying lots of maps of the islands, but using one map in particular, which the Falkland Islands local land surveyor facilitated me, analyzing such maps and talking about the Spanish gaucho place names with inhabitants, with the local islanders. When looking at maps of the Falklands, the contact with Spanish stands out through the abundant Spanish toponymy. As mentioned previously, some respond to the Argentine sovereignty claim. If we look at an Argentine map, not a local one, we see places like Puerto Jiménez, Isla Trinidad, Puerto Argentino, Bahía del Rosario. But then, if we look at local maps, as well as those Argentine maps, we start seeing other type of Spanish place names like Rincon Grande, Cerritos, Cantera, Dos Lomas. The first group are considered exonyms, as they have been named from abroad, and they can be very offensive to islanders, something I have looked into before with my supervisors. But when it comes to Spanish place names with an origin in the gaucho era, these are embraced by locals, as we will see soon, and they work as endonyms since they have been named from the actual archipelago. So prima facie, we can see that, well, place names in French and English represent the numerous explorers and navigators who visited the islands. Spanish gaucho names do not constitute anthroponyms. Instead, they refer to geographical features of the areas where livestock was practiced, including the countryside, while those originating in other languages, including those used by Argentina, define rather the coastal areas. In sum, one group of place names were coined by Argentinians from abroad, resorting mainly to anthroponyms to call the coastal areas, and the other group, our group, was created by gauchos. It is used locally, making reference to geographical features to name mainly the countryside. From now on, we will focus on this group. Now, you're probably asking yourselves, but how come gauchos ended up there? Well, livestock farming was for a long time the economic engine of the Falklands. The cattle business was mainly run by South American gauchos from here, from Uruguay, where I am right now, also from Argentina mainly. But these gauchos would disappear when the islands were handed over to the sheep farming industry by the end of the 19th century. But the earliest presence on the islands is still remembered as part of the recent memory in the many names of places of Spanish origin. Another example of this type of borrowed word is camp, derived from the Spanish word campo, which is used in the islands to refer to the rural area instead of the English possibility of countryside or another variant. Spruce, local historian, from the Falklands, states that the largest group of words characteristic of the Falklands is probably the one borrowed from the gauchos who went to work in the livestock industry. And she explains that they brought with them the terminology and the knowledge of how to make and use deer for horses, which were both transport and pack animals on the huge farms. They gave their names for streams, valleys, and camps, she says. Nowadays, due to the changes of our era, some of the words are no longer in everyday use, others are less and less. However, the other linguistic legacy of the gauchos, the place names, are still alive and kicking. So, during fieldwork, we were able to confirm that many place names carry a descriptive and a generic, and sometimes both in Spanish and sometimes one of each, like Rincon Verde, Third Arroyo, Chancho Point. These words are sometimes part of the place name cluster and are not in use in general conversation, as in going to the Arroyo Malo via la una isla. In other words, they are generics in the donor language, in Spanish, but have become part of the specific in the recipient language. It's not in all the cases, but in many. Some generics have been dropped. For example, the Arroyo Malo is now just referred to as the Malo, a fishing river, where one can fish in an area of the river called the Maneas. Maneas is also used to name the apparatus attached to the ankles of a horse to stop it running off. Looking at the Gaucho place names map, one can easily perceive the Gaucho imprint throughout the camp. A toponymy still in force, fully assimilated to the phonological system of the Falkland Islands after almost 200 years. During fieldwork, it became clear that this toponymy of loanwords, which exceeds 100 names, is positively valued by the local population, who consider it not only part of their history, but also as their cultural heritage. Now, we found 222 place names in Spanish in the Falkland Islands maps. 61 of them belong to West Falkland geographical features, and 161 to East Falkland. This makes sense because Gaucho presence was bigger in the East Falkland, especially since this area of the East Falkland was called Lafonia, and that was where gauchos mainly captured and slaughtered cattle. We also found out that 44 of those 222 place names are fully in Spanish, and 178 are bilingual, like White Rincon, Cuero Brook, Bombilla Hill. 78% refer to coastal regions, while 47% have the generic in Spanish, like Rincon, Arroyo, Camp, and 81% have been syntactically adapted. Unfortunately, we don't have enough time to go over details of this data, but I'm more than willing to share them with anyone who's interested in this subject. As I was saying, Arroyo Malo now is just the Malo. We have collected these examples from fieldwork. People would say we went fishing on the Malo River. So sometimes there's inconsistency towards whether it's a stream, an arroyo, or a river. Arroyo Pedro, now it's just the Pedro, like in the phrases, the tide was high at the Pedro. They have dropped arroyo. Sierra Chata is now just the Chata, like in there used to be a house at the Chata. No reference to the hill. Campo Verde is just the Verde, in like we rode through to the Verde camp or house. Now, non-official names overthrows official names. What do I mean with this? Well, as I was telling you, in East Falkland, gauchos would make their settlement. And that place was called Hope Place by the person who, an Englishman who was living in Uruguay. This man, the investor, called the settlement Hope Place. However, if one goes to the Falklands today, you see the road signs and people talking about saladero, which in Spanish means salting house, because that was what the settlement was. The settlement was a salting house for the beef. But if one goes to that very place where you can see the ruins of such settlement, you see that the sign goes Hope Place, the official name, or Saladero. But in reality, people just talk about Saladero. And well, locals are aware of the origin of these Spanish names. They can tell the difference between those created or imposed, as they say, by Argentina, and the ones that have their origin in what they refer to as gaucho heritage. For instance, someone during fieldwork reported that there's no doubt that the heritage, particularly with the land names and such, because of the gauchos, who were the first people to spread across the islands, that's why you've got so many Spanish type names and you've got more on the east than west. Something that we have confirmed through our data analysis. But the islanders are very aware of the historical origins and the density of these place names. Well, there's an interesting anecdote about a proposal to get rid of Spanish place names. There was a public meeting in the old gymnasium of Stanley, and the former chief police officer, who during the war proposed that all Spanish names in the islands be changed. But he was outvoted. Generally, people felt the old gaucho names were part of their history, and besides, any new name would have taken years to replace the familiar gaucho terms, said our informant. And he added, what people object to strongly now are the names given to places here by the Argentine government, especially Puerto Argentino, which has, according to this islander, no relevance, like some used by Garnet, also Argentinian, when he was at Port Louis, which have over time went out of use. Basically, islanders think that the proposal from this official was obviously because of the war and the heightened emotions of that time. But nobody considers it's logical to get rid of gaucho Spanish place names because of the conflict. It's still ongoing conflict with the Argentines. So, to conclude, well, Spanish place names reflect this heritage that I've been talking about, both in terms of the history of the archipelago and in islanders' narratives. The gaucho or gaucho culture is part of their heritage and their historical memory. When it comes to islands, it has been claimed by Gaffin that islanders develop a strong sense of self idiosyncratic to the place where they live, and that some other scholars think that this enhanced sense of difference and uniqueness appears to be stronger in islands than in other isolated places that are non-island environments. So these findings fit into what these scholars say. And I'd like to highlight the relevance of fieldwork that has become evident in this work. Visiting the Falklands twice and speaking with islanders face-to-face has unveiled facts that go unnoticed if one just relies on maps and gazetteers. Well, I have attempted to provide just first insights into this problem and asserts that looking at toponymy from the aspect of societal acceptance is both a valuable exercise and a promising field with lots of ground for novel research. And I believe that place names deserve far greater attention within academic inquiry with a wider scope of analysis, as I assume you also do. Thank you very much for listening to me, and I have to point out that the paper on which I have based this presentation was done thanks to field work in the Falklands, which was financed by the Falkland Islands government, the Foreign Commonwealth Office, and the British Embassy in my country, in Uruguay. And I'd like to thank Ross Challoner, the land surveyor of the Falkland Islands government, who provided me with an official map that was very helpful, because I had just touristic maps that I had collected in Stanley, but they are never enough. But if you want to contact me to find more information or to share data, I am more than willing to help you out. Thank you.
Thank you, Yliana, for that intriguing presentation so much. Yliana, I was thinking about when you were talking about the proposal in the end, to remove the gaucho names, and sort of the pushback, right? That there was, it was obvious that folks were attached to these names, right? I wonder though how that would have been received if there were a proposal like to return to native or native-like pronunciations. I mean, you see like in Texas, for example, right? Like the standardized, I know there's a lot of folks here that work on Texas naming, but a lot of standardized place names there. But the minute that, new Mexican immigrants come and sort of, if there's any suggestion to return to a native or native-like pronunciation, there's a lot of pushback. They're very protective of the anglicized versions of the names. So I wonder if you found anything on that, or on pronunciations of the Spanish origin names.
Right. Thanks for your interesting question. Actually, no. They are fully adapted to English, and there's no intention of. They know that they are not pronouncing them properly, but there's no intention of doing so, and that has to do, I believe, with the conflict with Argentina. I'm also looking into attitudes towards Spanish as a language, and the fact that it's to islanders, it's the language spoken by invaders. The 1982 war is still present. The wounds are still open to the locals, also to the Argentinians, and not really. There's no intention of pronouncing them the way Spanish speakers pronounce them. Still, Spanish is the second most spoken language in the Falklands, but it's spoken indoors, mainly by Chileans, but you are frowned upon if you're speaking Spanish in public. And that's what the Chileans that I've interviewed told me. So I don't see that happening. No, not really.
Yeah, like Spanish is kind of okay if it's regarded as in the past, right? But not as a living language per se.
Well, they need it. They still need it because they are very near the rest of South America,
right?
Where Spanish is clearly the most spoken language, together with Portuguese. And they also need a lot for the fishing industry, which is where they make most of their money. So they need Spanish, especially to communicate with Spanish fishermen from Spain, from Galicia mainly. So there's people learning Spanish and teaching Spanish, but it's a very interesting scenario in terms of language attitudes, because they acknowledge the importance of Spanish, they acknowledge the history of Spanish within their culture, but still it represents the enemy.
That's very interesting of how they negotiate those different needs and attitudes. We have a question here from Luisa. She says, I'm wondering whether the official names you mentioned are English place names, as in your example.
The official, okay, right, yes. Official place names, like in the example of Hope Place versus Saladero, yep, many times they are, there are many cases of these official and non-official, but the non-official is always in Spanish, that for sure, yes. But sometimes they cut short the official one that might have a part in Spanish and in English, and in many times they just keep the Spanish part because it's generally the specific.
Okay. Thank you. And then Eduardo asks, does that toponymy justify Argentinian sovereignty over Falklands?
Okay, this was a very delicate subject for me to study because, well, the fact that I'm Uruguayan and not Argentinian helped. For many people around the world, we are kind of the same nation, but for islanders, they can tell the difference. So that helped me as a researcher, because otherwise, if I had been an Argentinian researcher, I'm sure they would have taken the fact that me studying Spanish gaucho toponymy as an indicator of me trying to justify the Argentinian claim, which some people, many people have done from Argentina. But it is clear from the historical review I've done that these contact with gaucho, with gauchos, Spanish-speaking gauchos, was after the British took control of the archipelago. This is quite delicate. It's because one might think that these gauchos were there and then the British took control of the islands, but not really. When the British took control of the islands, there was a garrison of maybe 10, 20 people max. So gauchos came in big quantity in the middle of the 19th century when the Falklands were already under British administration. But yes, Eduardo, the Argentine still insists that that is an indicator of they owning the islands. So anyone interested in looking into this with me, I'm more than welcome to help them out with data.
That's great. Thank you, Yliana. I'm sure there are many more questions. We'll have to be moving on now. There are many thank yous here in the chat. Really appreciate your talk today. And,
thank you, Marian.
Continue to see you here. Thank you.